Rise of the Machine seemed to be an appropriate way to talk about robotics and integration as we're going to be doing in this next session. I want to introduce our panelists to you. On my left, Jose Rivera, in his current role as CEO of Control System Integrators Association, which he's held since 2015. Jose has helped to elevate the level of system integration industry and broadening the adoption of the association's best practices that help independent system integrators build better companies. He served as Senior Vice President for Strategy and Communications for Schneider Electric's industry business, had an 11-year career at Emerson Electric in the United States, United Kingdom, Germany, and Puerto Rico. He started his career as a sales engineer with Siemens in Costa Rica, with later assignments in Germany. Next to him, Vanden Boom is the Automated Systems Group Manager at Applied Manufacturing Technologies. Rick has more than 30 years of experience in the manufacturing automations industry. His background includes application engineering, sales, and operation management. He's worked for several international companies across multiple industries and has a track record of success in product development and new market introductions. And finally, Michael Lindley of Concept Systems. His role is Vice President of Business Development and Marketing. He's focused on working with partners and clients to bring advanced automation technology to the market. As part of the executive team at Concept Systems, he's helped the company's robotic business and also spent the last 15 years involved in technology and engineering. And as U.S. sales manager for a global data collections company, he was instrumental in creating new channels of business with mobile handheld devices and driving year-over-year revenue growth. And he's played a key role in integrating one of the largest geothermal plants in the state of Oregon as Vice President of Operations. So we've got a broad group of people involved in system integration, and we're going to talk about that aspect and robotics integration. We want to begin and get an overview of why system integration is important. CFE Media thinks it's obviously very important. We've worked with CSIA on a number of fronts. So, Jose, why don't you talk to us a little bit about some of the things that we're going to be talking about here in this panel?
Yes, with pleasure. As you can see with this slide, and that is a slide that has been around for a while, the number of connected devices is today at a point where it's bigger than the population. So there are more connected devices today than there are people on the planet. And we passed that barrier a few years ago. So there's nothing new there. What's new is that we used to have silos, very traditional silos, the industrial silo, the infrastructure silo, and all of these silos are coming down. So connectivity is taking place not only within the silos, but between silos, or the silos are coming down overall. So that will mean more things to be connected, more things to be integrated, so the potential for system integration will continue to explode. What is very important is that we are an association that helps system integrators become better companies, because normally system integrators are very good on the technology side, but when it comes to managing their companies and setting up the processes, this is where they're challenged. But it is very important because this will allow system integrators to take advantage of all the potential that is in front of them, and they will ensure that the partners that they're working with will have a successful deployment of their integration projects. So the last thing that I want to say is that we're an association of more than 400 system integration companies, more than 100 vendor partners. We help through the best practices, which is a manual that helps our system integrators, structure their companies to be more professional companies. And we continue to grow and we continue to expand. Thank you.
Very good. There's some of the things in your best practice manual that you're talking about, but thank you. Go. Yeah, I'll take that.
Okay.
Thank you. We want to begin at a very fundamental level, and we're starting to talk about robotics. And Rick, let's start with something fundamentally simple. Where and why should we be incorporating robotics into manufacturing?
That's a good question. We get that asked a lot by a number of our customers, thinking that they want to automate, understanding that there's efficiencies. But most often we find the opportunity for automation addresses harsh work environments, addresses ergonomic issues in the workplace as driving forces within the manufacturing environment. And then, of course, there's always a consideration for labor and throughput on the plant floor.
Yeah. Michael, how about you? What are some of the things that your customers are asking for right now, and some of the things that you see the need to deliver on?
Sure. It's really across the board. I've been on the floor now for the last 3 days, and we have seen all kinds of people approach us. I was talking to Rick earlier on some things that just are not ready to be automated or just don't have the volume. A gentleman was manufacturing trumpet mouthpieces. We're just not going to get there with that kind of volume. But there were a number of other companies that came forth that have repetitive tasks, that are simple tasks, that are great candidates for automation. That old adage of whether it's dull or dirty or dangerous, I think that's been said for quite a long time. I think you guys have mentioned that and wrote about that. But it's a great place to start. Certainly on repetitive tasks where the operator is not adding a lot of value to the equation. It's just back and forth for 8 or 10 hours. I think you also asked, why should they be doing that? And that can be cost savings, it could be throughput, and it can certainly be, on the labor, just keeping up with labor, certainly on those repetitive tasks. I don't think people are as interested in those kind of jobs, or it's harder to staff, or you have a high turnover, and robotics seems to fit those real well.
Yeah. Jose, what's your perspective?
It's very similar to what has been presented, but I would also add is that in some applications you want to have much more consistency that you can do with humans, and then also precision and tolerances. I mean, yes, we're reaching into levels that may not be called robotics, but some levels of precision and repeatability you cannot achieve anymore without having a machine.
Sure. And we see robotics from a safety standpoint as kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, as you've all said, they can do jobs that are hazardous or repetitive, and there are things that we're seeing being used in robotics that just weren't imaginable before because the robots are better. They're able to do more things. But on the other hand, we're also seeing a trend toward robotics and humans interacting in very direct ways on the floor. So where do we start with safety? Where do we start the discussion? And how do we change some of the internal mindsets as we're getting closer to using humans and robots in the same line doing parallel types of work? Michael?
RIA, of course, publishes the standards around safety, and they've been very progressive with keeping up with new technologies that are emerging and then incorporating those appropriately into new safety standards. And collaboration and working with robots seems to be happening and unfolding in two different ways. You have FANUC with their green robots and the ability to actually put your hand out and have that robot stop on contact. ABB has the Yumi robot, where you can drag functionality. Baxter, Universal Robotics, there's a lot of that. Being able to drag, and as you drag the robot around, it's generating the program in the background. You also have the ability to use area scanners, which can be used quite effectively where you have a robot, a standard robot that is not designed to be collaborative per se, but when you put it with safety scanners, you're able to create a collaborative environment. So you have Mitsubishi is on the front of the East Hall, and I think they're showing it quite effectively where you see a red ring, a yellow ring on the outside, and then a red ring. So as a worker comes into a particular work cell, the robot may slow and continue to do what it's doing because you're in a safe proximity, but as you get into the red zone or the danger zone, it would come to a full stop. The area scanner would then notice when the worker has left, and it would resume. So I see a lot of that being collaborative as well.
Yeah. Rick, what are you seeing?
Sure. So we're seeing a lot of customers coming to us. There's a lot of excitement around the collaborative robot space, and a lot of people that want to take these new robots and put them into production. And what we're finding is you can't take shortcuts in terms of engineering a safe and reliable system. So all of the same steps we go through with traditional robots are the same steps we go through with collaborative robots. And in many cases, you can take a so-called collaborative robot and by the application, the end-of-arm tool, the part it happens to handle, you can create an unsafe situation where it cannot work in an environment without, as Michael was mentioning, additional safety devices like area scanners and such.
I think we have to approach safety in robots the same way we approach safety in humans. There are tolerances, there are limits, there are boundaries, and we have to engineer that at the front end of the process so that once we get them on the floor, they can do the things that they're going to do, whether it's human interaction or robotic interaction. You have to engineer that at the front end.
Absolutely.
Jose, what do you see?
Well, what I would say is that totally true what has been said about safety, but one part that I think affects the psychology a little bit is that in the past we used to have a box, we used to have a cell around the robot, so it made the barrier like very obvious. And now with these collaborative robots, you don't have that barrier anymore, right? So the robots are integrating safety measures that are invisible, so they're sensing for presence. And I think the interaction then with humans is gaining a different level.
Yeah, and it's starting to gain some momentum as we get better at understanding what the robots can do and help to optimize that part of their operation and what they really can do. There are limits to what robotics can do. Michael, what are your customers talking about from an integration standpoint, and how are you helping to advise your customers on how and when they should be bringing robots into their system if they haven't already thought of it?
It's across the board. We work a lot in aerospace, so certainly aerospace is highly and quickly adopting robots for sure. But I'm really fascinated by general industry's adoption of robots. And what we see is someone comes to a show like IMTS, they get excited about integrating robots or considering robots, and they go back and they start looking at their applications. And it's very important that you look at your whole automation strategy and look at where are your bottlenecks in production. Look at where are you going to get the best return on that investment and where the robot's most appropriate. Oftentimes we see companies that have had experience with robots in the past and it hasn't gone well. And I think one way to instill confidence in a robotic application, certainly with executives who may be signing off on the project or other people that may be related or part of that decision making, is a simulation. Both FANUC and ABB, I think, have great products with RoboGuide and RoboStudio. And you're able to show a non-technical person or someone who's not familiar with the application exactly what that robot's going to do in the work cell, how it's going to interface with production in general. And I think that instills a lot of confidence.
And you've seen a change in the quality of not just and the flexibility of the robots themselves, but the programming that goes along with it. So somebody who may have looked at robotics 5 years ago, and to your point, said this really isn't a good application for us, may need to take a second look at it?
Yeah, and keep it on a list. And that's, Rick and I were talking about that beforehand. There's a lot of advantages to having a defined automation roadmap. So where are we now and where do we need to be in 3 years? Whether that's, and then of course you're overlaying that on your production volumes and expectations there, of course, but where are your biggest sources of automation? And what do I do today with this project, how it's going to fit into a long-term goal?
Yeah. Rick, same thing? I mean, you customers are kind of taking a second look at robotics, or are you helping them take a second look at robotics?
Well, both. And many times we enter into conversations and our customers have a rough idea of what they'd like to do in terms of application. They haven't really thought through the whole process. They haven't done developed a business case. So many times we work with them to take a step back and work through helping them to develop that roadmap, putting together a functional specification, working through the ROI, so that in many cases the engineers can take these projects forward to their management, sell them internally, get these rolled into the budget, and really roll out a successful automation project at the end. Not hit a wall halfway through the project. And
you mentioned ROI. That's not automatically just robot instead of human. There's many other factors involved in that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, can you talk a little bit about that for just a second? Because I'm interested, because the popular concept is robots replacing humans, and that's the simplest, easiest, most politically charged way to talk about robotic automation, but it's much more complicated than that.
It is more complicated than that, and many times it's evening out workload. It's taking the human out of a repetitive or dangerous work situation, as we were speaking of earlier. We also consider the other factors in terms of material flow in and out of the factory. It's not just what's happening with that particular robot, but taking an overall look at the plant, the overall manufacturing process, throughput, but really leaving no stone unturned. So understanding if we fix a problem here, are we just moving the problem further down the line?
And just to add to that, the ROI, you look, a lot of companies that we speak with are looking for a 2 to 3 year ROI, which is pretty standard with capital investments. Robots, when they're well maintained, and you're not just using one axis, if you will, but using the full range of the robot, you're looking at a 10 to 12, 15-year life out of it. So that robot may pay for itself in 2 to 3 years, but it can be retooled. And chances are that with the way vision technologies, our expertise are coming on board, that you'll find that I can't use that robot here today, but 3 years from now, I'll be able to repurpose it and be able to put on some different technologies and use it again. So I think there's a long-term, I think we get a little narrow with wanting to pay back the investment real quick, and we're not looking at, we're investing in robots, as part of our long-term strategy.
Yeah, and Jack Naling talked about that in the keynote, is that we need to start investing in manufacturing for a long cycle of growth, rather than trying to do the VC version of,
Yeah.
I need to get my turnaround in 12 to 18 months, or I don't want to even hear about the project.
You got it.
And Jose, both based on your experience in manufacturing on a broad basis, as well as your role now with CSIA, what are your members challenged with in terms of integrating robots and integration in general?
So one of the things that became very obvious at this show to me this time is that in the past you would see the proverbial island of automation, and you would have like the CNC machine, the robot there, and they would be totally optimized and automated between themselves, but there was very little linkage between them. And even in some of the stands here, you have the full supply chain, totally automated and being a fully automated manufacturing stream. So that is where I think system integration is playing a bigger role in going beyond just automation bits and pieces, but the full automation stream.
And as integrators, you've all filled an enormous role in manufacturing right now, because a lot of the small to mid-sized manufacturers simply don't have the bandwidth in-house to be able to take on some of these projects, yet they need to bring these projects to their manufacturing facility if they're going to continue to grow.
Yes.
What's the challenge, though? What are the drawbacks? What are the things that manufacturers, either at the plant level or a little higher up the food chain, what are the things that they need to be considering as they're looking at bringing in robotics? Rick?
Again, I think they need to look at their overall process, what they're trying to accomplish, not just in a local area, but on a grander scale. Need to consider the long-term maintenance of that automation. Do you have the right controls engineers, robotic engineers to support day-to-day production, keeping those lines up and running? You mentioned the connectivity. Where does the data go that you collect? We stopped by the FANUC booth earlier today. They have their total maintenance package. They're networking robots together to collect data from those robots. Now, what do you do with that information? And then now tying in all the field devices. So understanding how to most efficiently utilize those assets and keep them running.
Sure. Michael?
It's going to sound like a plug, of course, and it can be an answer as an integrator, but use an integrator.
Yeah.
It's certainly up front. Rick and I, we see a lot of projects. Our companies and our engineers are working with companies across multiple industries, across a lot of applications. So we have paid for our own learning curve, and we can bring that learning curve to the benefit of clients. I think what we see is clients will look at what we consider a reasonable price tag, and then they think, well, we can do it internally. And maybe they can. And if they have expertise, if they've got a track record of bringing in advanced manufacturing and having successful integration, then they should go for it. But if they haven't, and robots are a new instance for them or a new investment, use an integrator. And an integrator, as I mentioned before, you're going to provide that simulation up front, which also mitigates a lot of risk. So someone who's investing in a robot, they know it's going to suit its purpose. We also train the operators at the end. So we're going to turn this robot over to you. You're not going to be beholden to an integrator that we're the only ones that can work on it, and they can take ownership for it. But I think on a first project for a company who's not yet invested in robotics, consider using an integrator.
Jose, from your members' perspective, and we'll go down the list on this, what kinds of solutions are coming out of robotics? We talked about dirty, dull, and dangerous as a very broad thing. But are there some specific applications or specific vertical markets where you see this, the move toward robotics more than others?
Our members touch all the industries, all the verticals. So we don't have any specialized vertical. We have a very big participation. Our members have a very big participation in food and beverage and consumer packaged goods, and we see a lot of in that area. So these may not be robots like the very big ones that we see above. There may be more like the spider type, but there are robots nevertheless. Right. And we see that a lot.
And we often see robots in manufacturing as almost monolithic. They all do the same thing. They all move in the same way. But there are very small robots, and there are some huge ones out there that are all basically functioning to do the same kind of thing. Rick, what some of the markets that you're seeing?
So I think maybe a couple of the areas as opposed to markets. Certainly the collaborative robots, I think, will allow us to start looking at moving the automation closer to the workers and truly collaborating. We're starting to see a lot of movement in that area. The other thing in the traditional robot market, I think, is the ancillary components that go into automation, not the robots themselves. We've got better vision systems, a lot of 3D technology out there now that allows better and more reliable rack and bin picking, those types of applications. So I think we'll start to see us, as the supporting technologies mature, allows us to extend into other areas that we just haven't had the right, the right sensors, the right grippers, the right connectivity between different pieces of automation.
And that's a really good point, because it's not just the robotics itself that has grown up over the last few years. It's all of those other things that you're able to do, and the sensing and the vision that are able to allow you to continue to advance what we can do and how quickly we can do it.
Absolutely. They're key enablers.
Yeah. Michael, what's your thoughts in terms of either markets or applications?
Well, certainly what you just mentioned on the vision technology, processors have become very powerful and very inexpensive. So you combine that with 3D and 2D technologies, there's a lot that's very capable nowadays. Just a couple of examples. Deburring seems very common. That's a task that's very, very dull and can be very dangerous, and you can really increase throughput by automating that. Small parts assembly, cable assembly, things like that. Those seem quite prime for automation, certainly for robotics. And I think the big thing is going to be painting, to be honest with you. Painting with robotics has been done on a grand scale with the automotive industry for quite a while. It's been done, of course, in aerospace. But I see painting and coating on small batches or smaller applications really becoming prevalent. It's one of those things that it's a harsh environment to subject workers to. It also, yes, there can be some artistry involved depending on the part, but there's also a lot of just straightforward applications where you're maybe spraying the inside of bathtubs or shower tubs or things like that, where a robot can come in and do a great job with that. I think furniture assembly, same kind of thing.
I wanted to say the following, and that is that, we normally tend to have a vision of the robot of being this automotive industry big arm robot lifting very heavy parts, doing the welding and painting. And I think that we need to start migrating that vision of the robot to the much wider range that we have today. And this comment about better sensors and vision and stuff like that, I participated in one example where we had, with one of the companies that I used to work for, a spider robot that would take the sardines, cut them, take the picture, estimate through the area the weight, and pack them in the sardine. Totally automated, all in this hygienic process, very high speed. Of course, in this example, you need to have good vision to do all the coordination. You also needed to do, back to the ROI example, this you would not do in a place where you would have cheap labor. This was done in Germany, and it would have been prohibited to do this by hand. And so this is an example of it doesn't look like the traditional automotive robot, it integrates a lot of other things, and it is applicable in a place where labor is very expensive, and it can make it happen.
Yeah, and plus there's not a lot of want ads for sardine packers in a lot of these environments. So there are certain jobs that people don't want to do at all that are part of this. We touched on sensors, and I want to try and move the discussion a little bit to our broader issue about IoT and how you're seeing customers looking to marry a robotic system with some of the advantages of IoT and what some of your customers are looking for in those areas. Michael, let's start with you.
We don't have a lot of customers that are really making that leap. We have a lot of customers that are asking questions and are starting to consider, okay, where am I going with this? Because that technology, although it's been around for a bit, or maybe we've been talking about IoT for a while, seems to really be coming to bear, certainly within the last 12 months and what we're expecting over the next 36 months. So as companies retrofit something, so just in the general PLC, HMI, kind of market, as we look at retrofits now, it used to be we'll just replace or upgrade the controls, but now how do we replace those controls and make it ready for IoT? And the other thing that we're seeing a lot is the need and the real desire for real-time reporting and dashboards and performance metrics, not just at the operator level or the plant manager, but a senior executive who may be in another state or another country, but is responsible for that whole program.
But at least the questions are starting to get asked.
Very much so. Yeah, it seems like all the equipment that we're looking at is ready for that.
Yeah. Rick?
Yeah, I mean, our experience is very similar to that as well. There's a lot of questions. We're asking ourselves the question, how do we participate and support in this very broad subject? I think some of the things we are starting to see were in the past, you mentioned islands of automation, a lot of connectivity within a cell, maybe within a plant, but then getting outside of that plant to corporate offices, opening up the barriers to allow suppliers like us to be able to monitor and to have access into the automation and better support higher uptimes in the plant without having to, sometimes we have customers have to go out, they plug an Ethernet cable in, they're down, the production's down, and it takes hours for us to either get somebody on a plane into their job site or for them to make the connection for us to electronically dial in and support. So I think with all of this, the security levels for data exchange are much, much better, and in general, industries becoming more accepting of that.
Yeah, Jose?
What I would say is that a robot is a smart machine, and as such, it's subject to the asset management and predictive maintenance that you can do. And so that's at the most basic level, and that is already being provided by the manufacturer. I think it's at this levels, the extended levels, which is the full plant, what are the implications of this robot being down for the supply chain, these type of things. Yeah. But I think that at the very basic level, as a complex machine, it already comes with predictive maintenance programs.
And I think one of the things that you may already be seeing, and something that your customers are going to be asking for down the line, is not just the installation of the integrated system, but also the future maintenance of it, the future data analytics of it. They may want that to be done off-site as well as just the basic monitoring. Are you seeing some of those trends at least?
We are, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's something that we're starting to put together with the solutions that we offer to our clients. I think the days of having a large maintenance staff on the ready are going away from us, and being able to leverage the intelligence of a machine to either predict when maintenance needs to occur or condition monitoring. We're starting to see that a bearing on X machine is warming up. It's not a problem now, but it's starting to show wear, and that wear tells us that we're 90% of the life of that bearing. And I think that opens up some really fascinating doors where the machine could even see that condition, schedule its own maintenance, and order the part that needs to be replaced. I think we're moving towards that pretty quickly.
You've been reading ahead. You see what's coming up in our next session.
So okay.
We're going to be talking about maintenance in great detail. Rick?
No, I very much the same. Our customers need and expect immediate response. They want us to tell them when they should be maintaining. They don't want to stock a large inventory of spare parts. So I see all of this being enablers for us to be a better, as integrators, provide better service to our customer base and be very proactive in the future as opposed to reactive.
We're going to open it up for questions at this point, but I want to, as we're getting some questions formulated, one of the things I wanted to talk about was that very point. Manufacturers as a whole right now seem to be more thoughtful about what it is I can accomplish either within my own skill set, as Michael talked about earlier, or bringing in partners like system integrators or OEMs in some way to be able to solve these problems. But they're starting to get past the idea that we've always done it this way, and they're starting to look at new and innovative ways of getting better and better in a global competitive manufacturing environment. Jose, I know your members are deeply involved in those kind of discussions.
Yes, you know, like we have all been challenged now to think differently outside of the box, and this advice that was given about bringing some young people, you know, with fresh ideas, that is totally valid, you know, and I think that applies to our industry as well. Some of the comments that were made before, which is like make sure that you make the investment such that later on you can do something with the data you're gathering. I think that's an also great piece of advice. I think that we don't know exactly where we're headed, you know, so like we might as well have an open attitude and be willing to, you know, to deal a little bit with this. Somebody was mentioning on the last session about the leap of faith, you know, and I think that's what I would say. Yeah.
Rick, that leap of faith is starting to happen more and more as people realize they need to get more competitive because the rest of the world is getting more competitive.
Yes, yes, and I think more and more we're seeing, and I'll say the small to mid-sized manufacturers, an openness and a willingness to really look at us as integrators as partners and an extension of their organization. They don't have the luxury of having you know, a large staff of engineers that can work through, develop specifications, you know, have that forward-looking plan put in place. So they look at us to draw on the depth of our organization, that expertise to help them put that in place. And then, you know, through the execution of the projects in the plant.
Yeah, and Michael, it's not just a short-term partnership either. As we've been talking about, these are relationships that begin, but they can extend for months and years beyond the actual implementation, the actual installation.
Exactly, and Rick said it perfectly. It seems like there's just a broader atmosphere of collaboration just across the board. And to your point, we'd like to see ourselves as a strategic partner. And we understand their business. We care about their business. We want to be a part of it, not just do a project and we move on from it. But we have a vested interest in their success. It serves us, it serves them. And it just seems much more openness. It's a good point.
Yeah. Got some questions out here? Back there. Aaron?
Certainly, we've heard a lot over the last few days about the IIoT and big data making machines smarter, and robots are certainly part of that. What do you hope the IIoT and big data and Industry 4.0 will do to make robots both traditional and collaborative smarter in the near and long term?
Anybody want to dive in at that one?
Well, I think in general with the IoT, it's reducing waste is a big thing. You know, I quite often, depending on the production cycle or the methodologies, there can be a lot of waste, which, you know, environmentally is a negative thing. It certainly affects the bottom line. I think with the IoT, having visibility, deep visibility into a production environment is going to drive out waste. We're gonna hit the big things first, and then we're gonna start getting into the finer details. And I think that's where companies will see considerable savings. And I think in the long run, we're gonna make better products.
Yeah. Rick?
Yep. And I think for a long time within factory automation, we've had the ability to collect data. The challenge has been, what do you do with that? We can collect it and it sits there, and unless somebody was looking at that and making some decisions with that data, nothing happened. And what's really happening in the industry now is there's a number of, with all the connectivity, number of software packages that are coming out that are able to analyze that data and force somebody to take action. And in many cases before, we're in a failure condition.
Right. And we saw the big transformation a few years ago where sensors got less expensive, the cloud computing capabilities got less expensive and more prevalent, and the analytics just got so much better. So now we're kind of at a perfect storm of all of this, and that's really what has generated all this discussion around IIoT. Jose, any thoughts?
Yes, I would like to answer it in a slightly different way, and that is the following. So today, it is normal to have a smartphone and use it in the factory setting. In the past, it was not possible. It had to be all industry specific, and we didn't have smartphones, but it had to be industry specific. And now what we're seeing is, you know, like cross-pollination from the commercial side, from the residential side into the manufacturing floor. So if you think, for example, in a place like Japan, where they're placing a very big bet on robotics, helping them with their demographic challenges, because they don't view migration as a solution to their problems. You're going to have robots that will be interfacing with humans in a much deeper way, much more of this interface and intimacy that we were talking about. And I think that that will then help at the manufacturing floor when we're going to have these collaborative robots that will be able to sense more of the people's, you know, emotions or like, you know, facial expressions, these type of things. And I think that will be coming outside of the industrial space, but to help the industrial space and the manufacturing floor.
We got a question right up here.
So robots are getting smarter, the sensor technology is getting a lot better. That makes the robots more adaptive, makes them a lot smarter, more efficient, more effective. One thing I don't see, especially from an integration side, is making the accessories for the robots the same way. Tooling, fixturing, gripping technology doesn't quite keep up with the way the robot is moving forward. What do you guys anticipate doing about that?
That's a good point. When you look around the show, you see a lot of advancements on the interface of the robot and the robot itself, and then you see a very mechanical end effector. I'd like to think that 3D printing and being able to rapidly develop integrators or end effectors and just some more flexible materials, more lifelike, nimble fingers. And back to Jose's point, I completely agree with him. The amount of money that's being poured into the residential robots, both on the AI standpoint and then also the technologies to get robots to walk, to be able to pick up things and grip things, I think will start to carry over into the industrial world. But you're certainly right, we're a little behind.
Question right here.
You guys mentioned collaborative robots quite a bit, and I was wondering about the different technologies and methods for safety for the collaborative robots. Which ones do you see as the most effective, innovative that are out there?
You want to start with that?
Yeah. Go ahead, Rick.
That's a tough one. So there's if you walk the show, virtually every robot manufacturer has some offering in that area. Many of them, I think, are on par with one another in terms of capability, the application area, payload. So I can't say that from our end. We look at one and say this, robot is much more superior than the next one. What we tend to do with our customers is, what is the robot brand that you've standardized on, that your maintenance people understand how to service, how to program, that you stock spare parts for? There's common programming languages. And is there an offering in that area that fits? If not, we'll look for the next best-in-class robot manufacturer or model to fit into the specific application that we have.
I like the area scanners, to be honest with you. It brings down the wall. I think that's something, too, that's changing with robots, is robots used to be in the corner in a cage, like a caged animal, if you will, right? And now that robots are standing alone on the production floor, they seem more approachable. Area scanners, again, going back to RIA, they drive the standards, and as I mentioned before, they seem to be very progressive in wanting to keep up with technologies. And I think just effectively using area scanners is really one of the best routes. But going back to using a simulation to prove and demonstrate how is a worker or workers going to interface with this robot.
I actually brought down a robot yesterday afternoon. I was at one of the booth tours, and I just stuck my hand through the light curtain and boom, stopped right away. So I'm capable of breaking a robot. But I think I think the point that we're raising here, and I think the point that you're getting at is, from a robotic standpoint, everything starts at safety and works backwards out from there. If you don't design the robot to be able to operate 100% safely, it's probably not a good application for the robot in the first place. Right. And it's not just replacing robotic safety with human safety. You know, if the robot breaks, well, yes, you can go buy another one. That's not really true with the humans. But you want to start, as you're designing really all of your processes, but this one in particular, want to back it out from safety and then go from there.
Yeah, probably not the best way to say it, but we want workers to be able to be around a robot and almost be ignorant to the dangers. Yeah. Because, you know, with the swing of a robot, that's a very dangerous machine. Yeah. But as you said, with an area scanner, that thing will stop on a dime. And I think that's important.
Yeah. You have other questions? Yes, sir, right up here.
So earlier we talked about waste, and one of the things that I was thinking about is at what point do we start talking about wait time for robots instead of wait time for people? Does that make any sense? So I have expended capital. Instead of having 5 robots, I might be able to have 3 because they're mobile. And so they'll go from workstation to workstation instead of being a machine tending where it's, you know, on a gantry. Instead, it'll just run around on an AGV or something like that.
In the East Hall, there seems like there's more applications with robots on rails. That's probably what you're talking about. I think that's going to be something we see more in the next 12 to 24 months, is making that robot mobile. We were toying with the idea of putting a Yumi robot, the 2-armed robot, on an AGV, so it could work its way down the line for a QC application. But I think just in general, we're starting with the robots being cageless, and now we're going to look at, okay, how do we put a robot on a rail and move it from one side of the work cell to the other so it's constantly in motion and constantly working? Because that's the worst thing you want, is having a robot that's sitting there stationary as it's waiting for materials. And rails seem to be at their extension of the robot. You know, as you tie that in as a 7th axis, it's all coordinated.
Rick?
Yeah, I think we're seeing more and more investigation into putting these collaborative robots, especially onto the AGVs or AGCs, using those in lieu of a rail system, even going out and advancing applications into areas of picking in warehouse applications, where the robot's able to go to a specific location for a product, pick a number of those with integrated vision with the robot, loading that into a tub, and then moving to the next pick location. So I think as time goes on, we're going to see much, much more of that.
If I understand what you're saying, it's kind of, if I can use a baseball analogy, a player may have 3 different mitts for 3 different positions. You have a catcher, you have a first baseman, you have a fielder. They're going to have, that same player could be at 3 different positions using 3 different tools, but all from the same robot. And if you've seen the White Sox play this year, you understand what I mean about robots. Jose?
I've got nothing to add.
No. What are some of the things that you see in this area, and what are our next steps?
What I think is that we're just getting smarter. We're getting to use our technology better. Robots have been around for a very long time. I mean, that is something that needs to be said. I mean, they have been around for like 30 years or so, right? It's just now that we are getting them to scale down. We get them to be smarter, and they're finding many more applications that we had in the past. I will tell you one thing that was very interesting when I was preparing for this. I read I saw the news in Dallas about the explosive device that the police had a robot for, right? And so for a lot of people in the U.S., that was the first time that they made the link that the police could have robots for the use of, you know, dangerous devices, right? And I think that that is another example of a new application for a robot. Might not be manufacturing, might not be industrial, but it's another way to continue to evolve the technology into new applications that will help us all.
Very good. More questions? Aaron, over here.
Do you foresee a path towards a common robot programming language in the future, so we don't have to learn Fanuc, ABB, Denso coding requirements?
I don't know about a common language, but it seems that there's a strong drive by the robot manufacturers to simplify integration. It's very evident in ABB's booth. That seems to be their big audacious goal, is to make it really all of their robot programming like what they're doing with the Yumi, or that you'd be able to program via drag and drop functionality in their simulation environment, and that would automatically generate the code. As integrators, it's going to be an interesting challenge for us. Yeah. It's going to take really the mystery and the programming out of the robots, or at least that part of the integration.
And it's something that we've seen throughout manufacturing, is that there, if not a standard, at least the ability to be interoperable, because it's not necessarily going to be all ABB robots or all FANUC robots in a given facility. There may be different robots from different manufacturers who all need to connect together, but who who come from different families.
Yeah, and that might be part of the IIoT. What'll drive that as well, because all three robot manufacturers, considerably the largest three in North America being KUKA, ABB, and FANUC, they have places where they overlap in their product line, and they certainly have places where they really stand out. So you're right, you may have all three colors on your manufacturing floor to suit the best application, and that interconnectivity is going to need to happen.
Absolutely. Jose?
What I wanted to say is that the value does not reside in knowing the different programming languages. Quite honestly, everybody would be better off if it would be standardized. I mean, the value will reside in like being able to determine which are going to be the applications, how to better integrate, how to better deploy, what areas to leave manual versus. This is where I think the value resides, and this I call it details, about the multiple vendor languages for programming is actually a little obstacle in the way of bigger deployment.
Very good. But being able to connect robots in the same way we're connecting all of the other components of the manufacturing floor may be one of the ways that IIoT is going to be really beneficial in this environment. Other questions? If not, as promised, we're going on to the big question. From each of you, how is the IoT going to make manufacturing better, safer, and more efficient? And you guys have a unique perspective on this, because this is really your day-to-day operation, because your job is to do the same thing for your customers. So, Jose, what do you think?
So I think that by having cheaper sensors that can be deployed and more easily integrated into solutions, it will allow a lot of this technology to be deployed to be safer and more efficient. Just because there are a lot of things that are not happening because it's such a big problem. What we were hearing yesterday in the previous presentation about, all these different 50 databases for the information, and then try to find the correlation.
Sure.
These are obstacles really to implementing technologies that we have today. So I think IoT will simplify that in a way, and then we will be able to deploy what we wanted to deploy a long time ago.
Very good. Rick?
Yes, I agree. I really think the opportunity to network and to have some higher level intelligence software that's collecting this data, analyzing, and forcing action, before we have the downtime, is really a large opportunity, and something that's it's gonna make the plants safer. They're gonna operate more efficiently, for sure.
Sure. And Michael, both from that general question as well as from some of the things you're working on with your customers.
From a personal standpoint, I think efficiency is going to be the biggest thing. And that's also part of the world that we live in nowadays, and the world we're moving towards. With 7 billion people, we need to be more mindful of our resource use. And I think efficiency in the manufacturing environment is going to become standard, as opposed to companies are doing that and they're being seen as green. I think companies are going to do that, and that's being seen as competitive. Yeah. You look long-term at IIoT, one of the, I don't say unforeseen, or one of the benefits that's not often talked about is the customer feedback that will come into IoT. So customers will be able to give product feedback, and then you could almost instantaneously put that into the manufacturing environment because you know exactly what's happening and where. So I see that as the big thing. Again, as the IoT, for our experience, the first place that we're starting is on the maintenance and serviceability. And getting, as Rick mentioned earlier, taking what was once a reactive strategy and turning it into a proactive strategy.
Yeah, and that's going to be a great segue into our final session of the day on maintenance. But for right now, I want to thank Jose and Rick and Michael for a great presentation. Thanks very much, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.